If you walk into almost any pharmacy or supermarket in the United States during the summer, you'll see shelves lined with sunscreen, sprays, lotions, sticks, SPF 15, 30, 50, even 100, bright packaging promising protection, safety, and peace of mind under the sun. Most people grab a bottle, check the SPF number, and move on. But very few turn the bottle around and read the ingredient list. And even fewer realize that one of the most common ingredients in American sunscreens has been restricted in Europe. Not quietly, not recently, but as part of a broader shift in how different regions evaluate chemical safety. That ingredient is octinoxate, also known as ethylhexyl methoxycinnamate. It's one of the most widely used UVB filters in sunscreen. And for years, it has been a staple in sunscreen formulas across the United States. Octinoxate works by absorbing ultraviolet radiation, specifically UVB rays, the rays responsible for sunburn. When UVB light hits the skin, octinoxate absorbs the energy and converts it into heat. This prevents the radiation from damaging skin cells. It's efficient, it's relatively inexpensive, and it blends easily into lightweight formulas that feel comfortable on the skin. That last point matters more than most people realize, because sunscreen only works if people actually use it, and people are far more likely to use products that feel light, smooth, and invisible. That's one of the reasons chemical sunscreens became so popular. They don't leave the thick white residue associated with older mineral sunscreens. They spread easily, they feel like regular lotion. And for many consumers, that convenience is the deciding factor. But over the past decades, scientists have taken a closer look at how certain sunscreen ingredients behave, not just on the skin, but inside the body and in the environment. And that's where the conversation around octinoxate began to change. In laboratory studies, octinoxate has shown potential endocrine activity. That means it can interact with hormone receptors under certain experimental conditions. Now, it's important to be very clear about what that means. These studies are often conducted under controlled conditions that don't always reflect real-world use. The doses used in laboratory settings can be much higher than what people are exposed to through sunscreen. And regulatory agencies consider these factors when evaluating safety. But the findings were enough to raise questions. And in Europe, regulators tend to apply what's known as the precautionary principle. If there is credible evidence suggesting a potential risk, even if that risk is not fully confirmed, they may choose to restrict or limit the ingredient until more data is available. That's exactly what happened. The European Union reevaluated several sunscreen ingredients, including octinoxate. And while not completely banned across all uses, its presence in cosmetic formulations became more tightly controlled. At the same time, environmental research added another layer to the story. Marine scientists studying coral reefs discovered that certain sunscreen chemicals, including octinoxate, could contribute to coral bleaching. Coral reefs are incredibly sensitive ecosystems. Even small amounts of certain chemicals can disrupt their growth and reproduction. When swimmers wearing sunscreen enter the ocean, trace amounts of these chemicals wash off into the water. Over time, in areas with heavy tourism, the concentration can build up. Places like Hawaii responded by restricting the sale of sunscreens containing octinoxate and similar compounds. The goal wasn't to eliminate sunscreen use. It was to encourage the use of alternative formulations that were less harmful to marine life. But here's where things become interesting. While these restrictions were being introduced in parts of the world, octinoxate remained widely used in the United States. Why? Because regulatory systems differ in the US. Sunscreen is classified as an over-the-counter drug. That means changes to approved ingredients can take much longer. Regulators require extensive data before making adjustments. And until that process is complete, existing ingredients often remain in use.
42.
So today, you have a situation where an ingredient under increasing scrutiny in one part of the world is still common in another. And most consumers have no idea because from the outside, nothing looks different. The bottle still says SPF 50, it still promises broad-spectrum protection. It still smells like sunscreen, but inside, the chemistry tells a more complicated story. And octinoxate isn't the only ingredient raising questions. In fact, when researchers began analyzing sunscreen formulas more closely, they found that many products contain combinations of chemical filters, some of which share similar concerns, which raises an important question. If one ingredient has been restricted in certain regions, what about the others? And how do these ingredients behave when combined in real-world use? Because the truth is, sunscreen is not a single chemical, it's a mixture. A carefully balanced formula designed to protect the skin while remaining stable under sunlight. But as we'll see in the next part of this investigation, not all ingredients in that mixture behave the same way. And understanding those differences may change how you choose the product you rely on to protect your skin every day. By the time scientists began taking a closer look at sunscreen formulas, they realized something important. Most sunscreens don't rely on just one active ingredient. They use combinations. Octinoxate might be paired with avobenzone. Avobenzone might be stabilized with octocrylene. Other filters like homosalate or octisalate are often added to boost overall protection. Each ingredient plays a role. Each one covers a different part of the ultraviolet spectrum, and together, they create what's known as broad-spectrum protection, shielding the skin from both UVB and UVA rays. But when you combine multiple chemical filters, you also combine their behaviors. And that's where things become more complicated. Let's start with avobenzone. Avobenzone is one of the few ingredients capable of absorbing UVA radiation, the type of ultraviolet light that penetrates deeper into the skin and contributes to long-term damage like premature aging. On its own, avobenzone is effective. But it has a weakness: it's not very stable. When exposed to sunlight, avobenzone can begin to break down. That means its ability to protect the skin decreases over time. To solve this problem, manufacturers add stabilizing ingredients like octocrylene. Octocrylene helps protect avobenzone from degrading too quickly. But as researchers later discovered, octocrylene has its own story. Over time, especially when stored in warm environments like a beach bag or car, octocrylene can slowly break down into a compound called benzophenone. Benzophenone has been studied in laboratory settings and classified in certain regulatory contexts as a possible carcinogen. Now, the levels detected in sunscreen products are extremely low, and current evidence does not suggest that typical use of sunscreen poses a direct cancer risk. But once again, the presence of these compounds raised questions among scientists, not necessarily about immediate danger, but about long-term exposure, about cumulative effects, about how these chemicals behave when used repeatedly over many years. Then there's homosalate, another UVB filter commonly found in sunscreen. Homosalate helps improve the overall effectiveness of the formula, but laboratory studies have explored its potential to interact with hormone systems under certain conditions. In response, European regulators lowered the maximum concentration allowed in cosmetic products. In the United States, it remains permitted within higher limits. And then there's oxybenzone, perhaps the most controversial sunscreen ingredient of all. Oxybenzone is highly effective at absorbing UV radiation, but it has been studied for both environmental and biological effects. Marine researchers linked it to coral reef damage. Laboratory studies suggested it may have endocrine activity under certain conditions. As a result, some regions restricted its use. And many sunscreen brands began reformulating products to remove it entirely. But here's the key point. None of these ingredients exist in isolation. They are part of a system. A chemical system designed to balance protection, stability, texture, and shelf life. Change one ingredient, and the entire formula must be adjusted. That's why sunscreen formulation is one of the most complex areas of cosmetic chemistry. Manufacturers must consider how well the product protects against UV radiation, how stable it remains under sunlight, how it feels on the skin, how easily it spreads, how long it lasts on the shelf, and increasingly, how it affects the environment. All of these factors influence which ingredients are used and in what combinations. And this brings us back to the difference between regions. In Europe, regulators often act more quickly when new research raises questions. They may restrict concentrations, require additional labeling, or encourage reformulation. In the United States, the process tends to move more slowly. Regulators often wait for stronger scientific consensus before making changes. This doesn't necessarily mean one system is right and the other is wrong. It reflects different approaches to managing uncertainty. But for consumers, it creates an unusual situation. The same sunscreen brand may have different formulas in different parts of the world. A product sold in Europe might use newer UV filters that are not yet approved in the US. Meanwhile, American products may still rely on older ingredients that European regulators have limited. And most people never notice because the front of the bottle looks the same. SPF 30, SPF 50. Broad spectrum, water resistant, the language is familiar, reassuring, but the ingredient list tells a deeper story. A story of evolving science, of ongoing research, of different regulatory philosophies shaping what ends up on store shelves. So what does all of this mean for you? It doesn't mean you should stop using sunscreen. In fact, dermatologists agree on one thing very clearly. Protecting your skin from excessive sun exposure is essential. Ultraviolet radiation is a major risk factor for skin cancer and premature aging. Sunscreen plays a critical role in reducing that risk. But it does mean something else. The type of sunscreen you choose matters. Many experts now recommend looking for products labeled broad spectrum, which protect against both UVA and UVB rays. For those concerned about chemical filters, mineral sunscreens containing zinc oxide or titanium dioxide offer an alternative. These ingredients sit on top of the skin and reflect UV radiation rather than absorbing it. They tend to be more stable under sunlight, and they are often considered safer for marine environments. Of course, they come with trade-offs. They can feel heavier. They may leave a visible white cast. They can be harder to apply evenly. But as we saw in the earlier story, sometimes those visible characteristics actually encourage better application. And better application means better protection, because at the end of the day, the effectiveness of sunscreen depends on how it's used. How much you apply, how often you reapply, how evenly it covers your skin. Even the best formula won't work if it's applied too thinly or not reapplied after swimming or sweating. And that brings us back to the title of this story. An ingredient used in the majority of sunscreens. Restricted in some parts of the world, still widely used in others. Not because it's been proven unsafe in everyday use, but because science is still evolving and different regions respond to that uncertainty in different ways. So the next time you pick up a bottle of sunscreen, take a moment to do something most people never do. Turn it around, read the ingredient list, not because you need to memorize every chemical name, but because understanding what's inside that bottle gives you something valuable: choice, the ability to decide what works best for you, for your skin, for your environment, and for the way you live your life. Because sometimes the most important information isn't on the front of the label. It's hidden in the fine print on the back.